Okay, everybody, here we are at the NRB Convention 2025, and my next guest that I am just super delighted to be able to present to you today is Cheryl Chumley. She's a United States Army veteran, a mother of four, and the opinion editor, the host of the Bold and Blunt podcast for the Washington Times, and also the author of a book called Chloe, book one of the Chloe People. What's the title? Chloe's People, a novel,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay, sorry, so don't have my readers on. I can't quite read.
Chloe.
Chloe.
Yep.
Well, Cheryl, so great to have you and to meet you this morning and everything. And I really enjoy the Washington Times. I think it's a great source
Thank you.
for balanced and conservative perspective on things. So thank you for your work in that.
Thank you. So
Well-
glad to have you as a reader of the Washington Times too.
And what's your book, Chloe? What's that about?
So Chloe is my first fiction. I have 5 nonfiction, and Chloe is my first fiction book that came out, and it's part of a 5-part series. It's Christian fiction, but it's dealing with people with very difficult paths that include addiction, abuse, things like that, and how they finally come to know God in somewhat mysterious manners. So that's sort of the elevator pitch.
Wow, how interesting. That sounds amazing. Just, I want to talk about a lot of stuff with you this morning, but how can people find that book? Is it on Amazon?
Yeah, I have an author page on Amazon. Just, type in my name with author, and that book and all the others will pop up as well.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, Cheryl, one of the things there's so much happening right now in the political realm, but with Donald Trump and the White House press briefings, it is absolutely night and day, first of all, in terms of transparency, the Trump administration compared to the outgoing Biden administration. I think I heard that Trump has answered 1,000 some odd questions already himself personally with the press, compared to Joe Biden at this time was 100 and something. So is it just a new game in town?
Oh, it's totally a new game. And, we really knew this about President Trump anyhow, because he's always been that way. He just, when we saw him the first administration, he would walk across the White House lawn to his helicopter or on his way to somewhere, and he would always stop and accommodate the questions that the nearby press were throwing at him. And to say that Donald Trump and his administration is the opposite of transparent is just it's a lie. And there are many in the media now who are making a big deal out of what this administration is doing with the Associated Press, but they're sort of skewing the truths there. And the AP still has full access to Donald Trump and his presidency. They just aren't allowed in the very private Oval Office right now, that's all. And so this administration is really to be commended for how open and transparent they are.
Yeah, I don't remember very many times when reporters are actually invited into the Oval Office itself en masse.
Right.
Occasionally he'll do an interview or obviously a broadcast from the Oval Office, but is the AP at the regular, are they still invited to the White House press briefings with the press secretary?
Yeah, they still have their seat in the press room. They still have their communications with the press office. You still, as a matter of fact, go to AP and you see all their White House coverage. So they're not exactly the poor victim being shut out of the discussion.
And do you feel like it's appropriate for the president to say censure a media source for, in the case of the AP, wasn't it their refusal to adhere to an executive order that he had on, was it the Gulf of Mexico, or
Yes.
which one was it? They didn't want to call the Gulf of America, and so he said, fine, you're not going to come to these press meetings.
Yeah, the Oval Office is by invitation only. You can't just walk in there either as a private citizen or as a member of the press.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not going to abide what this administration is putting out in terms of an agenda or policy on something so simple as a factual renaming of a body of water, then how are you to be trusted to get the facts straight on policy and things that really have an impact to the American people? So yeah, they have the right to choose who's allowed in the Oval Office.
Well, so one of the other things you see is that they have, now I think he did some of this in his first term too, but in the White House press briefings, they have made a real point of bringing in non-traditional media and giving them a seat in the press briefings, podcasters and others. And it seems to be a recognition that the way Americans are getting their news and information today is changing. So what are your thoughts about that?
So I am 100% in favor of what this White House is doing. They're not turning over the press room to bloggers and just man on the street types with smartphones, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're still keeping the mainstream press and all that. They're just opening up a couple of seats to allow those with alternative viewpoints to come in and get their reporting firsthand at the White House. And that's great, right? That's great for the American people, because you're right. We don't get our news now anymore from CBS, NBC, and ABC, right? There are whole cable networks, there are whole bloggers and podcasters who are very good at what they do. They just haven't been able to get their seat at the table because of the elitist type of bubble in the media in Washington, D.C. So yeah, a couple seats for these new alternative medias, I'm all for it.
You know, in a dictatorship, one of the first things that will happen is the dictator will seize control of the media, right? He wants to control the release of information and the narrative, the way things are described. And so, how important is it for a country that wants to remain free to have free access to media with different perspectives and different bits of information?
So to answer that question with a stark example, you only need to go back to the COVID years, when anybody with a dissenting viewpoint that countered the government narrative of the day was booted off social media, was basically kept out of the media discussion. And so it's crucial, right? And especially when you're dealing with matters of policy, science, things that rely on differing viewpoints to arrive at a certain truth. If you keep out purposely one side just to advance your own personal agenda, that is tyrannical. That is how your communist nations grow.
Yeah. Well, there's a Pew study that was done that showed that 58% of Americans now get their news from digital devices and only 32% from television.
Right.
We're in a new world now when it comes to media.
Totally new world. And, you know, I would look at that optimistically because it opens the door. I'm always in favor of opening the door to more, because I have faith in the American people to be able to discern truth from lie. Once they do their own due diligence. And you're always going to get those few people that just are the troll-like types, and then they grab the bullet point that they want to put out there, and they treat it as a fact without doing their due diligence.
Yeah.
But by and large, I think it benefits the American people to open the doors this way.
Well, just a historical question. How is it that liberals came to control American media, news media? I mean, I think over 90% of college professors, for example, now are Democrats. I bet the numbers are similar in most of the mainstream media newsrooms and editorial staff and all that sort of thing. How did this happen?
That is a really good question, right? We could probably dive deep into that. But I would say that there was a sort of distancing of Christians from the political spectrum, from media, from much of the culture.
Yeah.
And as that distancing occurred, it opened the door for your big government types, your globalist minded, your atheists and secularists to enter and really take over that field. And we are suffering under the consequences of that now.
Well, that is such an amazing answer because, one of the things here at Truth and Liberty, what we're all about is getting Christians to re-engage in the public square. It seems like there's a mindset or a philosophy that has permeated the church, I would say, over the last 120 years that, we're about the kingdom of God. That means we're not involved in this world. We're heavenly minded. We're, going to heaven, so it doesn't matter. But that's not really, that's not a biblical point of view, is it?
It definitely isn't, and especially in America, because if you want to sum up what America is about, American exceptionalism, it's the idea that individual rights and liberties come from God. So if you have God-given rights and liberties, if you remove God from that equation, which means those who know God step back from politics and culture, what do you have? You have government granted rights and liberties. And this is basically the war that's going on in America right now.
Yeah, and the idea of sort of like your faith is a private matter. It's okay to worship inside the four walls of your church, but don't bring that out into the public. That kind of concept would be foreign to Christians 120 years ago, but now it seems to be commonplace where we walk around sort of timid about what we believe, afraid to speak up, and we're living more as victims of a cancel culture than we are, actively trying to make disciples of the nation.
Right. And, a Christian serving in politics, for example, we're not talking about that Christian being a Bible thumper or preaching from the political office, right? We're just talking about the worldview. When you're a Christian and conservative, you think biblical truths first, you think constitutional truths and application second, and then you take a look at what's going on in the landscape, and everything's filtered through those two things. So it's the worldview that we want, not the preaching from a political office.
Right. So what is your perspective? How long have you been in journalism?
Maybe 30 years.
30 years,
Yeah.
quite a while.
Yes.
What's your perspective on overall the direction that we're headed? Are we moving in the right direction, or back toward a restoration of American principles and to our founding overall? Or what do you see?
We're moving in the right direction now. Under the COVID years, I was very pessimistic about the state of the media because I saw too many in the media, even your conservative, supposedly friendly organizations, that were putting out information without the proper context. And it just did a huge disservice to the American people. We lost so many individual freedoms at that time because the media didn't do its due diligence. But under President Donald Trump now, we're seeing a sort of uptick in the opening doors to alternative media outlets. We're seeing Americans reawaken to the idea that it's their individual responsibility to not just listen to the parrot bullet points on certain cable outlets, but to actually go out and get their news from a variety of sources, and that's all good.
Yeah, and I heard it, I think it was on Fox the other day, but they said that the approval rating, these aren't the best polls, but Americans right now, only 31% approve of the job the media is doing. That's a pretty low confidence level, isn't it?
Yeah, but I look at that and I actually like that. And I like it when the approval rating for Americans toward their political leaders is low too, because then that tells me that Americans are having a healthy skepticism when they consume their media, when they listen to their political leaders. And that's something that really is in our DNA as a nation. We're supposed to be questioning. We're supposed to be suspicious.
And it seems like it used to be understood as well that there should be an arm's length between the government and the media, right? That the media's job is to question, to challenge the government, to be that that element of accountability. Has that eroded over the last few years?
I would say yes, and I've seen this firsthand. I came up through the ranks of media. I didn't start out in national media. I started out in very small town journalism, covering Board of Education, city, councils and things like that. And even back then, I noticed that some in the media wanted to be friends with their government sources, and they would go out to lunch with them, they would have drinks with them, they would, have entertainment with them. And there needs to be a wall between journalists and those they cover. And so now fast forward to what goes on at the national level, and all these media types are just schmoozing with the politicians on Capitol Hill, trying to befriend them instead of doing the hard watchdog duty for the American people.
Yeah. Well, and what about honesty and credibility in journalism? I think Americans seem to be waking up and realizing how much they've been lied to by traditional mainstream media. Are you seeing that as well?
Absolutely. And that's a moral failing. And it goes toward what I was saying a few minutes ago about the need to have more Christians in media, in politics, and so forth. But if you can't trust your media to, when they make an error, at least acknowledge the error and go on from that, then that really leads you down a path of tyranny in the nation.
It seems like, back, of course, I'm old enough to remember, Walter Cronkite on the evening news and sort of that sort of era. And there seemed to be sort of a journalistic ethic and creed that separated opinion from news in a way, where it's one thing to report the news, and there's a certain mission about that. There's a virtue of just bringing information to people so that, if you will, democracy can work, so the public can be properly informed. And we're going to separate out our opinions over here, and we'll tell you what we think. But there's a line between those two. But has the mainstream media completely blurred the lines between those two things over the last 15 years?
To a certain extent. I've thought about this matter quite a bit, and I think it's not bias that's the problem so much. It's when you don't acknowledge bias in the news, when you present yourself as everyone else is biased but you. I mean, you're all biased. Everybody is biased, just in deciding what stories to cover. I think the bigger problem is taking place in the media, and I've noticed this since maybe Barack Obama days onward. You're getting a large segment of the media, especially at the national level, that do not put forth America First type of ideologies. They actively seek to undercut Western agendas, Western principles, and I think that's more the danger than just bias.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love what you're saying about Christians getting involved in journalism and the media. Do you know, are there organizations out there that are pushing for that, advocating for that? As I go around and talk to pastors and churches and things like that, I'm not really seeing any of that. So, is there anything along those lines?
So NRB does a great job of bringing us all together, right? And it's an interesting question you ask, because the Washington Times has an arm called Washington Policy Institute.
Okay.
And as part of their agenda, they are trying to reach out to journalists on college campuses to help them go into journalism. And it's definitely a faith-based approach in certain respects. And so we at the Washington Times are kind of doing that.
Yeah.
So I would look at some of the nonprofits out there, though I can't think of their names right now.
Yeah. What's it like for a young Christian reporter, someone who wants to? I'm a Christian. I'm 20 something, and I want to have a career in journalism. Am I going to face some significant hurdles getting a job and getting advancing through the ranks and that sort of thing?
Probably, to be honest. If you go to some of the Christian media outlets, of course not. But if your hope is to work in ABC, NBC, or the New York Times, the Washington Post, you're definitely going to receive some pushback. But that's actually a good thing, because look at the Washington Post, look at the New York Times. The voices are all the same, the agenda's all the same. And I think we're rounding a corner in America where even these leftist-leaning media organizations are looking for those with different viewpoints to bring to their pages, because they're losing readership. CNN, MSNBC, firing people, laying people off. And that's when you as a Christian or a Christian conservative can really step in and be that voice in the wilderness, making a difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before the last election, didn't Jeff Bezos, do something with the opinion part of the Washington Post, and there was a near riot?
Yeah,
I mean,
the big exodus. They wanted, normally to endorse Kamala Harris, and he said, we're not endorsing anybody now. And a lot of people got up in arms and left the newspaper, and
Yeah, is that just Bezos, the businessman, seeing the handwriting on the wall?
Yeah, I think.
Not an ideological shift on his part.
Yeah, all these big tech companies, I think they just see Donald Trump came in and now they want to befriend him.
Well, what about the social media, the big social media giants? I mean, with Facebook and so many others that are left-leaning. What can we do to balance that out? Or is that just part of the world we live in? Because so many Americans get their news from their social media.
Yeah, it's been a little disheartening to me years ago to see the progression of the social media that are largely driven by the leftist leaners, right? And I'm glad Elon Musk now has X, but where have the conservatives been in the entrepreneurial spirit to bring forth social media companies like that? So I think we're a little bit adrift right now. We're behind the curve. Elon Musk has opened the doors at X, but YouTube is still a dark, dark land for Christians and conservatives. So hopefully we'll see some maybe business-minded Christians bring forth some ideas to compete.
Where do you stand in terms of government action with respect to fairness and balance in social media? Is there anything the government should do, or should it be hands-off?
Yeah, and this is the big debate, right? And there are very, very many Christians and conservatives who want to see government step in and sort of even the playing field. But I don't like making that argument because we have a private market. We're a free market in America. And if you start sending the FCC in, for example, to regulate what goes forth at YouTube, well, in 4 years, 6 years, sooner or later, the tides are going to turn politically, and we're going to see the left do the same thing to us again. So I would much rather have the solution come from a free market driven perspective.
Yeah, and that's where the perspective of time helps. As we see, these processes will work themselves out, but it is, I think, ultimately on the church to be that voice, to rise up, to make disciples, to send people into the culture, to bring the Bible to bear. And I think we're living in a great time where we're actually seeing some things change.
I do too, which is why I guess this is a nice segue. Your organization trying to get more Christians involved in media is just, it's the right time for it, and it's a crucial time.
Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show, Cheryl.
Thanks.
It's great to have you on. We're a little bit out of time now, but you got to come back on our real show. And we'll do that through our studio and everything else. So
love to. Thank you so much.
It's been great talking with you.
Thank you.